Somewhat different this time, though. First time this year we don't have any guests. It's just Aaron Thunder and myself. And it is somewhat surprising. I was just thinking about who we've had on the show this year. Andy Thompson, David Silverman, Justin Griffith, who was, by the way, the one that organised Rock Beyond Belief. We'll come back to that. I've not seen much of it on YouTube yet, but it only happened on Saturday. We've had Lona Frank, we've had Stacey Gonzalez, and of course on the last show we had Richard Dawkins and Sean Fairclough. Now, some of you may have been wondering where on earth that recording is and why is it not on YouTube. The problem was the software that we use went from a free version to a paid-for version, and we didn't realise, and the free version stopped recording audio. So whilst we have a perfect video recording of the show, there's absolutely no audio. If anyone happens to have audio from that show, please let us know. But otherwise, unless you are very proficient at lip reading, it's somewhat pointless to post it. But as I say, if someone has by chance recorded it, do let us know.
We could do a sort of a Das Ubertang sort of bunker Hitler voiceover for it. That might be fun.
Well, it's possible. And since then, wow, what a time it's been. I've took my first trip to America ever to attend the Reason Rally, and then the American Atheist Convention that followed that. And I met all sorts of interesting people. A lot of people from YouTube, and they were there in real life in 3 dimensions, which was a bit spooky. At the Reason Rally, Thunderfoot had about an hour-long exchange with Eric Hovind, and the first 20 or so minutes of that I actually recorded, and it was so painful that I got someone else to hold the camera and record it and went off and did other things because it was just dreadful. And we'll go into the details of that first. Oh, and are you actually with us? Because I can't see you at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know why my camera isn't picking up.
All right, well, I want to start with you because I think the conversation that you had... Oh, there we go, we can see you now. The conversation that you had with these 2 people, they were using arguments that we have heard many, many times before. They were using the evolution is only a theory line. They were explaining sin by reason of a fallen creation and the dietary habits of Eve. And what I refer to as old-fashioned arguments. Whereas with Thunder, Eric seems to have dropped most of those, or his father's arguments, relying on science, and has moved on to what I would refer to as philosophical arguments. And I just wonder whether there is going to be a change in the sort of arguments that we hear from theists now, and whether you think they're going to drop the old Hovind scientific style of argument and go for the slushy sort of William Lane Craig philosophical argument. Firstly, Aaron, tell us a bit about that conversation, the sorts of arguments they were using, and whether you think we're going to see this sort of change.
Well, one I want to comment on first is that watching that, I mean, I know I've gotten a lot of comments on that about how well I did on that conversation, but when I see that discussion, I don't see myself as doing particularly well. I see so many missed opportunities wherein I wish that I had just shut up and let the guy say what he was saying so that I could then launch on it, because the arguments were amazingly bad. I mean, it wasn't just the stuff that I actually brought up. It was like when that one guy said that, this is historic. Well, we've got volumes on how the Bible is not an historic document. But it's like you say, the arguments that they were using were the things that you would pull out of a chick tract from 20 years ago. I mean, it was horrible. They didn't even realize where Hovind was. They told me that he was in a minimum security, and this is part you didn't get on the film because our conversation went on for quite a while, and one of the bits that didn't show up on film was when I explained that Kent Hovind is in Supermax, Colorado. This is not a minimum security when they refer to it as Supermax. Now, the arguments that Eric Hovind was using with Thunderfoot, I wasn't privy to that. I did see pictures, still photographs, and it looked like Eric Hovind was taking his shit throughout that entire conversation. I mean, we have even in still photographs, we can see that Thunderfoot was every bit as animated as I was. He's grabbing Hovind by both shoulders, trying to reason with him. And Hovind really looked genuinely discomfortable. He looked like he was looking at the camera with this wincing face. I mean, the kind of face you make when you're sitting on a toilet. I mean, this was not a moment for Eric Hovind at all. I mean, granted, he came to the Reason Rally expecting that he had something to bring, I guess. And I thought it was funny that he finally caught up with me after we're packing up and everything's getting ready to leave, and I'm alone. And I'm walking out here, and I've got my camera, and there's no one to hold it. And Hovind comes up to me with this microphone, and he wants to do an interview with me, and I tell you, there's no one around. So it's very frustrating. No one will ever see that video because I didn't give him anything that he could use, nothing I could imagine that he could distort into saying anything that he wanted it to. I left him nothing. So I doubt we'll ever see that interview at all. And that's why I wish someone was there to hold my camera for it, because I would like to see that interview.
Well, certainly Thunder has got the whole thing recorded as far as I'm aware. But just before I come to you, Thunder, can I just remind people, we are taking calls if you would like to appear on the show, discuss any topic that you like. But if you happen to want to talk about the Reason Rally, if you were there or whatever, just send whatever questions you have, send contact request through Skype to Magic Sandwich Show. But please include in it the gist of the topic or question that you would like to address. Thunder, tell us about the conversation with Hovind and the style of argument that he was using.
Right, it's actually something that's been kicking around for months, maybe even years now. It's called presuppositional apologetics. And as far as I know, it stems out of Answers in Genesis. And it's since been picked up by creation science evangelism. And it basically goes along these lines. They give up every single one of these fact-based arguments, and instead they just go for, well, you need God to actually know anything, therefore any argument that actually contains anything is proof that God exists. That's basically the entire argument. Now, I've got no real problem with that, because this is grotesquely unconvincing, to the point where, you know, these guys usually get their purchase when they make their emotional arguments. And the fact that they've been routed completely to this last little baby infinitesimal toehold that they basically, I assert that God exists, therefore God exists, and you can't know anything without God, is that's where they've been pushed back to. So
let me get your critique of my answer to that question. He said, can we know anything absolutely? And I told Eric Hovind that it's two sides of the argument, or there's two levels of the argument. In one sense, it's impossible to prove that reality itself exists. But that, you know, and how would we know if we're not living in a matrix-like illusion? But even if this is a computer-generated video game, then the rules still apply to us. We are subject to those rules, and within the confines of the reality, that reality is still real to us, even if we ourselves are not in fact real, if we're non-player characters that are part of this game. And that within that context, yes, we can know things. And I also told him that we prefer not to say absolutely, no matter how well proven something is. And if it's proven, then it's absolute. But no matter how well proven it is, we still prefer to refer to it as theory, because when you start talking in absolutes, you limit the imagination and you stop progress.
But my view is, however cleverly this argument is advanced, and I know that he tried for about 15 minutes to put Thunder in a corner. You know, there's an area of knowledge that we don't know about, and basically I knew where he was going with this, because what he was going to say is, within that area of knowledge that we don't know, God could exist. But if we don't know about it, and if it is only a possibility, then it remains unknown and only a possibility. So even if we accept his argument, I don't see where he thinks it goes.
Now, I mean, this is the answer that I tried to give Hovind, but never really got a chance. And this is actually a genuine philosophical argument about the universe. And I think you actually mathematically demonstrate this one. And it goes down to what is the minimum size that you actually need of a model needed to accurately model the universe. And for this, you need to actually break down, well, what's the minimum amount of information needed to model the smallest amount of information in the universe, and it basically goes down to wave functions. So the minimum amount of information you need to model a wave function is another wave function. So the minimum amount of information you need to perfectly accurately model a universe is the universe. It's the minimum size of the model that you need. Now, we don't actually need a model the size of the universe to make accurate predictions about it. There's this economy of scale thing. You don't need to know all of the quantum states of the Earth to know how long it'll take to go around the year, how long it'll take to go around the sun, because that can be summarized in about 4 terms and 2 constants. Right? So we can actually know a grotesque amount, we can actually have very successful models about the universe whilst knowing precious little about the actual details of it. And that's something I didn't actually, Hovind was very keen to push on to these sort of essentially pointless philosophical questions like how do you actually know anything? Now the way that I would answer this is different from Aaron, and that's all of these things you at the bare minimum need to make some assumptions. The assumptions that we all make because, in fact we necessarily make because we would die if we didn't, is the universe exists, you can learn something about it, and models that actually have predictive capability are better than those that don't. Now you actually do this at a subconscious level on virtually every point. Of the early models that you establish about the universe are things like logic. So, you know, things being true or false. This is actually an empirical model established from observations of reality. If you didn't have a universe, how would you establish whether logic or something else was actually a more useful set of rules? So you have this practical models of utility about reality, and then you take a look at Hovind's what he does. He makes all of these himself. So these questions that he keeps asking over and over again, is that true? Is that true? Well, in order to actually establish Boolean operators like true or false, you need to have established that logic exists, which means that you need to say that models of reality exist and that they can be right or wrong, and that there's those actually model a universe. So Hovind would doggedly push this point that how do you know that's true? And for me, you've got to make some basal assumptions, and the assumptions that we make are the ones that enable us to survive. Because if we didn't make them, we wouldn't be alive. It's a sort of self-selecting criterion.
Now I have to add something to that. I mean, when I was at that event, I shook 100 hands, and I shook the hands of the boys that I was talking to. One of them I genuinely believe that I reached, because he didn't have the walls of defense. I mean, you know, when somebody knows that their belief is not true, but they're going to believe it anyway, they have these strong defenses against any argument against them. But this boy, the first one, the one with the 180 on his shirt, he actually believed sincerely that he had a good argument when he got there.
Yep. Yep.
And he figured out by the end that he did not. Now, the other guy obviously was turning to dishonesty for a defense. And so I don't expect to see him ever again. But I do expect that the guy with the 180 on his shirt, I expect that he is going to come and shake my hand again.
I think you underestimate your effect you had on the other person, because I think that it was like, when he walked off, it was like a boxer who had been severely beaten, you know, crawling out of the ring. He was very defensive, and what struck me about them both were the naivety of their position, and it was as if neither of them had ever heard any of the arguments that you were advancing. But I think you underestimate the effect you had on the other one as well. Thunder.
Well, let me contrast them with Hovind, okay? Because the guy with the 180 on his shirt, he came and he shook my hand and he seemed genuinely sincere. After this whole debate, he actually came to me and took a picture with me. And I thought that, this is novel. And I liked the guy, okay? Mm. And I don't fault either of these boys. I told them both that, that Kent Hovind is in prison for fraud. Why? Because he is a fraud. And I told them that the people that they are turning to for support are deliberate liars. They are professional liars. And so it's no surprise that they've been deceived by these people. When Eric Hovind approached me, he came with his hand out to be shook, and I folded my arms and said no. His was the one hand I would not shake, and it is not because he and I have a philosophical difference like Thunderfoot might be suggesting. Eric Hovind is a crook. He is deliberately criminal.
Professional liar.
He is deliberately criminal in his fraud. There is nothing moral or righteous or good about that boy that I'm aware of. And I would not shake his hand for that reason.
Just going back to the two that you were referring to first, the one thing I noticed was that they were typical in the way that they argued their case. I'll give one example that stands out. When you suggested that Ray Comfort makes money lying to people and doing what he does, they said, well, he doesn't make any money. He puts these videos out for free on YouTube. You then explained that he makes a couple of $1 million a year. And at that point, they don't say, okay, you're right. They immediately just shift the ground and say, well, that doesn't prove that there isn't a God. And this sort of like really frustrates me. And it's very difficult to control a conversation in that sort of atmosphere. But when you proved something to them, it's not like they say, okay, I accept that. They just shift the ground to the next argument. Thunder.
It's just a continually moving goalposts. And this was the frustrating thing about Hovind is, and it's one of these things, you've got to actually essentially learn by doing. That the only way that you're actually ever going to learn the tricks that these folks use is by actually engaging with them. You're not going to learn the rhetorical tricks that they use. Like it's bloody obvious to me when I look back at this interview that I did with Hovind, is that he will actually add his own points and then change the subject so that you do. In other words, he sort of gets these 3 points in at the end. So he'll say, well, actually, I would say that this is a religious gathering, but I don't want to talk about that. So he gets to make his uncontested points for free.
And you allowed yourself, Thunder, I have to say, you allowed yourself to be interviewed by someone who's holding the mic, as you did with Ray Comfort. And that has such an effect because he's got the opportunity to just interrupt and cut through you at any point.
Actually, it turns out yes and no, because I was recording it as well.
Oh, I know. Well, I was.
But you're right. It's
both of you had that. I mean, Thunder, you had other people recording that conversation. I was alone. The event was over. The band had left the stage. The crowds were heading for their various means of transport, and I'm in a field alone with Hovind. I've got nobody to stand there to hold the mic so that I have any recourse for whatever he does with that interview, if in fact he finds something that he can do with it.
Oh, you'll be happy to know that he's not put it up yet. So
somebody has put up his recording of it in full parts. Yeah. And from what I've seen of it, it's not edited.
With the interview with Aaron?
Oh, not Aaron's, no. Yours.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
But as I say, I think you came up with a wonderful expression when we were doing that conversation with Thinking Atheist, that this seems to be a new tactic of theirs, to use what loosely described as philosophical arguments, because the scientific ones, they just get trounced on. They've pretty much given up on it. And your description of it is they can now kick the ball into the long grass and claim a draw. That seems to be as high as their arguments go, because philosophy of itself, I'm sorry, it cannot provide evidence. I mean, it seems to be a fairly well understood aspect of philosophy.
Well, I mean, this is the other one that I kept on making to Hovind, is even if he's right, that these are, you've got no real intellectual grounds for distinguishing between these, say, two different models of reality. The bottom line is, one builds great civilizations, the other leads to goat sacrifice. Which one are you going to go for? Hovind's quite happy to go down the goat sacrifice line.
But I think all he's really trying to do is to be able to say you can't disprove God. But I'm quite happy to give that concession to them and save a lot of time. Whereas I don't know whether that is a good tactic to use. Is it not all right to say we accept there is a possibility that God exists?
The mere fact that we are at this point now where they have been driven from certainly on YouTube, from this whatever creation science, and they're now into this presuppositional apologetics, means that we fought the battle, we won the battle, we hold the field. To an extent, whether they claim victory from the sidelines is an irrelevance. They're on the sidelines.
But is it a matter? Is it a problem accepting that there is a possibility that a God could exist?
Well, I mean, this is why I took it with Hovind. You can propose that, and it can explain everything. It's just it has no predictive capability because fundamentally,
this is the point. It doesn't. By making that concession, it's such a small concession. It doesn't help their argument a great deal because you can say there's a possibility of all sorts of different gods, supernatural entities that exist. But what's your point? I don't see that there's a big problem in making the concession. Andy, have you got anything on that?
Yes, I see a problem with making the concession in that I think like a scientist. And that means that there needs to be a mechanism for things. It's like my son when he was 5 years old and he asked me, how does God just make stuff? Well, the thing is, you can't just say abracadabra and have things poof out of nothing. You can't have, people want to challenge me, creationists want to challenge me on symbiosis, on how symbiotic relationships can evolve. And it's very clearly obvious how this happens. But when you talk about creation, then you're like pre-cutting puzzle pieces to match each other. And how are we doing this? What is the means by which water is turned into wine? It's not enough to say that it's a miracle. It's not enough to say, well, God can do whatever he wants. No. There has to be a mechanism. There has to be a reason to believe this. And we believed these storybooks for thousands of years, and we pick and choose, and we completely disregard the vast volumes of the books that we ourselves promote. These inconsistencies we ignore.
I'll take issue with you on this point. I don't think that conceding that a God exists also necessitates conceding that miracles happen and water can change into wine and Jesus walked on water. I don't. That is not the concession that I'm making.
Then we need to have a definition of what a God is.
Exactly.
But can I just interject a slightly tangential point? But this is another one of the lines that Hovind tried, is that, if God never lies and he tells you that he exists, then God exists. Hovind
asked me if he could prove that God exists, would I worship it? The concept of worship is beyond me. If I knew that God exists and everything that God is supposedly be able to do, would I worship it? I can't imagine worshiping anything.
Yeah,
I mean,
same here.
I wouldn't link worship with fear. I could more link worship with respect, but if we're talking about Hovind's God, no, that God will never earn my respect. And I told him this. I said, if he could prove that his God exists, no, I would not worship it. But if a better God than his did exist, I still wouldn't worship it, but at least the better God would be worthy of my respect.
Okay, well, we're joined by our first caller of the show. I'll come back to you very briefly, Thunder, but can I just remind people, if you would like to appear on the show, send a contact request to Magic Sandwich Show on Skype, and we'll see if we can get you on. There are a couple of people got lined up. But Thunder, and then we'll go to you, Oliver.
So this is the point that I didn't make, but it's so going to get cut in at some point, is how many people here have ever watched Family Guy? Anyone watch Family Guy? No? Well, anyway, in Family Guy, there's one of these episodes where Peter Griffin's on trial, and his surprise witness, he calls, is the ghost that never lies. So he says, ghost that never lies, and he then goes on to try and establish his innocence by the testimony of the ghost that never lies and only he can see. So, if the ghost that never lies tells me he exists, then the ghost that never lies must exist. And if the ghost that never lies tells me that Hovind's God doesn't exist, then Hovind's God must not exist. There, it's when you're into this sort of assertions equals truth game, you can prove or disprove whatever you want.